Thank you very much. It's a huge pleasure to be here with you all today hosting this session in RedScon. My name is Michel Souza. I am from Derechos Digitales. And today I'm here with Vanessa Koetz from Coding Rights from Brazil. And we also have Camila Leite, representing the Brazilian Institute of Consumer Defense, Idec, and David Lewis from Digital Asia Hub. We don't know if Ambercinha is going to be here with us, but maybe we're going to have his presence later. So just to be sure, today we are going to talk about what about online payment architecture and big techs? And we're going to talk about data protection and competition. We know that, for example, we have the Brazilian case, we have the India case, and we have a lot of cases that are going on. And our main focus is like to understand what's happening in these places and understand also how does the architecture of the online payments has to deal with the financial, with data protection, with competition, and a lot of issues. So it's a huge pleasure to host this session. And today we are going also to have like the reach of the investigation from Coding Rights. It's a very nice investigation. Vanessa will talk about it. And we are going to have some questions and some information also about from the public. So just to start, I think that Vanessa, can you tell us what's happening in Brazil and what did you reach with your investigation?
Yeah, for sure. So good morning, good evening, good night. I am going to share with you, and please let me know if it's shared. Can you see? Okay. Yes. So yes. Hi, I'm Vanessa Koetz. I'm project director and researcher at Coding Rights. Coding Rights is a feminist organization working with technology and human rights. And my mission today is to present in this quite short time a study developed by Bianca Kremer, Joana Varon, and me called WhatsApp Pay, the Next Frontier for the Expansion of Data Monopoly, and it's supported by Derechos Digitales. So, yes. In this study, we analyze Facebook monopolistic position through WhatsApp Pay functionality. And just to understand the Brazilian context, I'm from Brazil, I forgot this, is that in March 2021, the Central Bank of Brazil approved the use of WhatsApp Pay in the country. It is a feature for money transfer through the app, and no fees or charges are applied to payment carried out through this. So the focus is on small payments, and you just need a card. Yeah. These functionalities had already been launched in 2020, but was suspended a few days later by orders of the Central Bank of Brazil and the Brazilian Administrative Council for Economic Defense, who is the maximum competition authority in the country. So the Central Bank of Brazil authorized in March 2021 the Facebook Payments of Brazil, this company, to operate in payments market as a payment initiation service provider. And this payment initiation service provider is responsible for executing a customer payment transaction without participating in the transaction settlement. So that is without touching exactly the money. And in Brazil, this payment initiation service provider regulation is guided more by the concern with the information flow than the finance flow itself. But we need to get a big picture to understand how Meta and Facebook is going further in its data monopoly. WhatsApp has become it's become part of our everyday life in Brazil, and I think all around the world, and even more during pandemic and world accelerated digitalization. WhatsApp is present in such many dimensions of life, such as professional, product and service, family, etc., and has become the world's most popular messenger application. So in Brazil, WhatsApp is already the only chat app in the country that has a 0 rating deals with mobile operators. That is, it can be accessed free of charge for data traffic and free of charge when using internet connection plans. So that's a big advantage in tech competition. And it contributes to this monopoly and limits access to other messaging apps, especially by the poorest people who depends on access through prepaid plans with lower data plans because Brazilian internet is so expensive. But it's important to know that even though WhatsApp is the largest messaging app in the country, still the payment feature has not been widely adhered to by the population. And now Brazil is the second country to test this payment service. The first one was India. But it's not by chance that the pilot tests are implemented in huge app markets located in countries far from the company headquarters. So just as WhatsApp latest changes in privacy policy have also been different depending on geopolitical powers, the strategy for financial products and service offered by the companies are different depending on the country's regulation and other factors actually. So what did we find during this study? Well, first of all, first of all, it's what I've written here. Never has a bank or a credit card company had so much information about us. And we cannot deny that the massive size of databases held by big techs increases their competitive power in our information society and positions in a unique place in the face of smaller initiatives. So the entry of big tech companies into the payments markets and in other elements of the financial system contributes to a data generation loop that feeds the big techs. So, and this loop has 3 key elements: data analytics, network externalities, and interoper activities that feed back on each other in this data generation repetitive cycle. If Meta, Facebook, through its various products, was already collecting data from user social network, now it also collects financial data. And even we don't know if WhatsApp intends to become a super app like Chinese WeChat, it's possible to say that Meta and Facebook further increased its consolidation in data market. Oh, sorry, I got lost here. Yes. Tapping into this enormous market power can result in abusive practice favoring its own service and product. The imposition of difficulties and barriers to the arrival of the other competitors, and based on its hegemony in the market, the decreasing the quality of its service. And we have already been noticed this in Brazil, such with the interruptions in the provision of the service. And new challenges may appear as WhatsApp has the possibility of integrating with PIX, an instant payment system of the Central Bank of Brazil, and it's very successful here. And also WhatsApp can become part of the Brazilian open banking. So some of our conclusions, I know the time is very short, is the first one is there is a regulatory gap regarding the entry of big techs in the national financial system. So big techs, they are not banks or fintechs whose main and almost exclusively activities lies in the financial market. They hold other ways of doing business that are based on massive data collection. So the traditional focus on competition related to a single market is not enough. It is necessary to avoid having only one economic approach, but a regulatory and a supervisory integration between the fields of competition, of financial system, privacy, data protection, consumer protection. And furthermore, there is no single universal solution to this. Big techs are not just in one country, and without a doubt, national and international coordination of formulation, regulation, and inspection activities related to big techs in the financial market, they are necessary, especially among countries outside of the Silicon Valley. So we just brought some recommendations, and the first one is that it's necessary a special focus on the exchange of data collected between the companies, which did not occur in the Brazilian case. I think Camila can talk better, whose analysis was the lack of the common enterprise exploration between WhatsApp and Cielo. No? And secondly, we noticed a need for cooperation between authorities with the elaboration of cooperation terms, especially between central banks, consumer and competition authorities, and national data protection authorities. And third, we need for international cooperation between regulatory and supervisory agents, especially from the global South countries, in order to counterbalance the international monopoly. If you want to, I think I don't know about my time. I think it was a short presentation. If you want to know about more, there you can access our presentation, our study in .coding rights. And yes, and thank you for this.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. It's very, very nice, interesting, important issue, and this research also. And I recommend people to read this research. It's very interesting topic, and it's very well written. And now I would like to go to Dev Lewis from Digital Asia Hub. Dev, can you please just tell us the context of this online payment architecture and what's going on?
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction, Michel, and welcome to everyone joining from all over the world. Since time is short, I'm going to sort of give you a very quick 7-minute snapshot of the fintech sort of payment infrastructure and some of the key flashpoints of the last couple of years, and there have been many in China. And I think China is an interesting example, as Vanessa was talking about Brazil and how Brazil has to deal with WhatsApp, which is an American company, and deal with these dynamics. In China, you have Chinese giants and the Chinese government, so jurisdictionally it's very different. And I think the kind of possibilities and the kind of dynamics are interesting to observe. So 2021 was a big year for data governance in China. 3 big laws now govern data flows. Initially, you had the cybersecurity law from 2017, and now that's been joined by the data security law and the personal information protection law. So essentially, we have these 3 laws that now govern all data flows. And over the next few years, we'll see more specific regulations come in play. We also saw data become, according to the Chinese government now, a fundamental factor of production, which is really important because it sort of put it up there as a very, very key asset that has to be managed, that has to be harnessed, that has to be grown, and a key asset of the state, which again gives you a very clear indication of the framing of data, who's data for, and who's going to pull the value. And we saw large fines across the spectrum on major tech companies, Alibaba, Didi, and Ant Financial, which I'll talk about in a moment. Because I think the Ant Financial case study is very, very interesting. Number one, because I think it demonstrates the dynamic of a sort of contestation of power between the state and the private sector. Also, because Chinese laws, the lawmaking in China in general, the laws tend to be very high level principles and values. And so it's very difficult to actually distill what exactly a specific point is. And so when you see the actual implementation of a law with a specific company and investigation, it's interesting to then to see what the regulator actually means when they say, no cross-border data flows or what is important information and things like that. So moving to Ant Financial, which, in the context of payments and financial data is really, really key. So Ant Financial, for those of you not familiar, is China's largest fintech company and among the largest in the world. They have about 1 billion users across, mostly in China, some in Southeast Asia and other parts of the world. And they claim to have 751 million monthly active users, which is a very, very large amount of monthly users. And most of their services run from payments and lending to then assets and risk assessment. And in terms of payments and financial, that's about 43% of the Chinese market in 2021, along with WeChat, which is the other major player. These two tech companies essentially control all the payment flows. And so they really have a very, very deep insight into the Chinese economy, Chinese consumers, and especially Chinese SME businesses. So while as traditional banks were giving the loans and dealt with most large companies and SEOs, it's the smaller private businesses, consumers like you and I, and that data has essentially been in the hands of Ant Financial. And so Ant was prepared to do a large IPO in 2020. Jack Ma, who was also the co-founder of Ant, gave a speech where he was calling out the Chinese regulators for not being innovative enough when it comes to regulating fintech in China. And a few weeks later, the Ant Financial IPO was suspended, and as of now, it stands as permanently suspended, major because the state came in and is putting in place new regulations for how financial data is going to flow. And all this largely stems from a big sort of confrontation between the state and private sector, and this is how I see it. With the state, with the private companies and the amount of data and assets that they have, the state has been trying to get more access to that, but so far unsuccessfully. In 2016, Ant Financial was given a license to be a bank and to do credit lending. That license was eventually revoked. However, the Chinese state then created a new entity called Baihang, which was meant to be a sort of PBOC, People's Bank of China, created market entity that would collect the data from all these various companies together and put it together under one sort of umbrella. However, that hasn't really worked. We've seen essentially Ant Financial, Tencent, other companies withhold the data. There have been many news reports talking about how this kind of data is not being shared with the state. And this has sort of been the underlying tension, right? On the outside, China would seem like a monolith with the state having supreme control. However, domestically, there are a lot of different power drivers and shifts, both within the central and state governments, but also between companies trying to push back. And one of the ways they were able to push back was the lack of data protection laws that really provided, let's just say, a clear list of principles and rules by which the state could go to a company and say, this is the data you need to provide and why. And so they've been able to sort of get away from major regulatory capture because of this. However, with the introduction of these new laws, and the PBOC has been putting in place new laws as well for financial data, this is starting to change majorly. And so one of the key things that I think is important to focus on is the idea of data and who owns it. So there's a thinking and there's a growing undercurrent within the Chinese state that because the platform companies were able to first collect the data, why should they have the exclusive economic access over that data? And that data maybe has larger, wider use cases for other companies, for the state, for people. And so that data should not be purely within the control of a private company. And so these are the kind of debates that are happening right now. And one of the solutions that are being discussed, and there have been news reports of the last few months, that essentially now Ant Financial is going to be creating a joint company along with the Chinese, People's Bank of China, and create a sort of a data sharing mechanism where certain kinds of data is going to go into those databases. It's not really clear the modalities. Of course, it's very early days. The investigation is not complete. However, essentially, these are the solutions that are being submitted, that Ant Financial alone should not have the exclusive right to sort of harness the value of this data. And financial data is really important. And I think we're starting to see this idea that if we want to, if that Ant is going to be considered a monopoly where it has access to such a large percentage of financial data of Chinese citizens, and now these are the ways that I think that are being discussed with regard to getting this data outside of purely the sort of walls of the financial private company. So I'll stop there. As I think that's the sort of spectrum of the overview of what the major developments are happening with fintech and data in China. And I look forward to hearing what some of my other panelists and definitely getting the questions from the audience. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dev. It was very interesting to see how the differences that we can see from what Vanessa said and from what you said. And I would like to go now to Camila. Camila, can you please tell us about the consumer perspectives in Brazil, and how do you see this case?
Sure. Thank you so much, Michel. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you also, Vanessa and Dev, for sharing this panel with me. It's a pleasure. Also, thank you, RightsCon, for this great event. So since I have a small amount of time, I will try to be complementary to Vanessa and to bring some Brazilian perspectives, and also talking about WhatsApp Pay and WhatsApp case in Brazil, since it, as Vanessa mentioned, it is the biggest app in Brazil. But first, I will start talking about a little more about our antitrust authority, CADE. Then I will talk about the WhatsApp case, and then I will dare to present some consumer and competition perspectives so we can discuss it further. And I remain also available for questions and discussions on the next step. So sorry for bringing this highlights in Portuguese, but I try to do a translation below. But this is to present that our antitrust authority does not generally focus on digital markets, and also the main approach of our antitrust authority is not to intervene. So our antitrust authority generally has an orthodox position, and this is not different on big techs. So I brought some highlights about the new president of CADE, which was the former superintendent, which is the investigator of CADE, and he claims to be he claims not to intervene in general. He claims also to spare big techs on intervention. We had some Google cases, we have some OTA cases, which is online travel agencies cases, but on payment, we only, as far as I know, we had two big cases, which is Bradesco Guia Bolso and the WhatsApp Pay case. About Bradesco Guia Bolso, this fintech denounced one of the biggest banks in Brazil, which is Bradesco, for not sharing data. So the situation is contrary on WhatsApp. The concern on the WhatsApp case is that the fintech could use the data for other purposes. So in the WhatsApp cases, we have more concern on data privacy, data protection issues. And in Bradesco Guia Bolso, we have more of competition issues in a traditional sense of banking. So other than that, as I mentioned, and as Vanessa mentioned, we have the WhatsApp case, and at first, CADE and the central bank made an interim measure against it. So that was presented some competition concerns and also regulatory framework concerns, as Vanessa mentioned, since WhatsApp is considered a payment initiation service provider, and this was not regulation at that time. Now this is work. The WhatsApp Pay is working in Brazil, but it's not. It is still subjected to some concerns, and these concerns are centered on what we call the WhatsApp privacy case, and I would like to focus a little bit more on it. So the WhatsApp privacy case is being analyzed, as Vanessa mentioned, all over the world in countries such as India, Turkey, Argentina. So a lot of countries in global South generally, but not only. And the concern is that the privacy policy that update that WhatsApp announced last year in January could affect consumers in sense both on privacy issues, on consumer issues, and competition issues. And WhatsApp payment is one of the services that is being analyzed under it. In Brazil, Idec, the Brazilian Institute of Consumer Defense, provoked and denounced it to competition, consumer and data protection authorities to analyze this case, but it is still pending. We had a victory on a recommendation made on these three authorities. So CADE, Senacon, which is the consumer authority, ANPD, which is the data protection authority, and also the prosecution office recommending some changes on WhatsApp privacy policy, but the case is still pending. And one of the biggest issues is that the authority have not analyzed the sharing of data, which is the main point for us. So when we are talking about the financial services, WhatsApp only initiates the payment, so it does not end the payment, but it does gathers, it does collect and could use this data for other purposes. And since WhatsApp is very powerful, not only in Brazil, but all over the world, we have concerns about competition. So the case is still pending, but we can dare to present some concerns. And I agree with Vanessa that we have a lot of network externalities in Brazil. So more than 90% of the Brazilian internet users use daily WhatsApp, has on their phones and uses WhatsApp, and the payment could be another element to locking consumers on this platform, on this ecosystem. And the concern is that we don't have more competition on other platforms, on other fintechs. For one side, WhatsApp could challenge the power and the concentration, the banking concentration in Brazil. From other side, it could also raise some privacy concerns as we are bringing here. And this is worsened on the fact that we don't have a lot of alternatives on using other messaging apps. In Brazil, WhatsApp is really the dominant platform. So from one side, we have more competition with big techs entering in financial services, but we also cannot stop worrying on how this data could be used also against consumers and also for protecting private interests. So sorry for talking fast, I will stop here and I'm available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Camila. Very interesting points about how the sharing of data and network externalities. And I would like to come back to Vanessa and ask you, Vanessa, how was the methodology of the study that you told us a few minutes ago, and how did you manage to reach the regulators and know more about this?
Thank you so much, Camila and Dave. It was very nice to hear from you. I know, like, you were studying a lot about it. So first of all, we did our study. It's a short study. We did it in almost 4 months. So, and it's a super short study. So we want to get deeper in this subject. And the methodology developed included desk research, analysis of the case records, the case in CADE, like this council Camila was talking about. We analyzed it. We analyzed the terms of service and privacy policy of Facebook and WhatsApp, and it's a lot of terms and service, very different, and they are always changing. It's a trick way. And we analyzed we made some FOIA requests to the Central Bank of Brazil, and FOIA requests like asking information about the process this authorization process as payment initiation service provider that WhatsApp got it. And we received information from the president of the Central Bank of Brazil. So it was very nice, very consistent for our study. And we had some focus interviews with the key actors to understand the functioning and potential impacts of implementing the system. So we interviewed representatives of Meta, we interviewed some colleagues from India, from Kenya actually, because M-Pesa was like a model for Zuckerberg to enter in this financial system. India is the biggest market of WhatsApp in the world. And we interviewed like the consumers expertise as Camila. We interviewed like public defenders, a lot of people in this, and we need to thank you very much for the time, for the attention. And so from a feminist perspective, the study begins with the technopolitical contextualization of WhatsApp and the launch of WhatsApp payment in Brazil. And this dominance marketing, and not just the market, the subjectivist, the Meta Group is a monopoly in the messaging apps market, searching like these new frontiers, then the financial service sectors. And then we want to understand like the scenario of this WhatsApp payment launch too, and the authorization process with the Central Bank of Brazil, the authorization process, not the authorization process, but this competition process with the CADI, and then the cases in Kenya, the cases in India. Then we understand actually the Brazilian regulation. I think Camila brought some elements. It's very incipient, it's very new, and it's always changing. And not just the Brazilian regulation about provider service initiation, payment initiation service provider, but also the open bank regulation is something that is almost changing. The PIX regulation also, it's important for this payment system that I mentioned. And then we started doing our reflections about just concerned about this feminist perspective and of course this data colonialism actually. So we were trying to understand the context from the global south and located in Latin America. So it was a good experience. It's nice, it's a nice study. I invite you all to read, and the full end report is in Portuguese, unfortunately, but we also publish a research summary in English, which is on coding rights social media platforms, and I think the link is right there.
Thank you very much, Vanessa, for explaining also the methodology and some interesting considerations, for example, about open bank and PIX, because they are like state built, and how they like are going to interact with this start payment system and all the fintech and all the data protection authority and all these important issues. And now I would like to go back to Dev. Dev, can you tell us and what do you see, what's going to happen with these new laws you were talking about, and how about the regulators? How are they going to be in China, and how this is going on? And just one more question, you were talking about like a data sharing mechanism. Would it be like a kind of an open banking from China?
Yeah, thank you for the questions. And of course, that's the million-dollar question that I think all investors are also looking at as they watch their stock portfolio plummet to new lows. All I'll say is there's definitely a bit of a turf war at the moment so with regards to the data flows, I think we have the Cyberspace Administration of China, CAC. They are coming up as the key regulator with regards to the cyber laws and regulations in China. The CAC gets its authority directly from the president and chairman Xi Jinping, and it is very increasingly empowered right now to act and to bring together the different authorities within China. So for instance, traditionally you have the Ministry of Public Security that would be a large player with regards to data flows and cybersecurity measures, and they're the ones who were the main drivers of the cybersecurity law in 2017. However, since then, the CAC, Cyberspace Administration of China, they've grown and grown in stature and size, and by all accounts, with the DD case study and the Ant Financial case study, they have been quite involved into the processes. However, with finance, the People's Bank of China plays a very, very large role in actually stipulating very specific guidelines. For instance, with Ant Financial, the PBOC is coming in to basically weigh in on the question of, is Ant Financial a bank or a technology company? Because the message in the discourse so far is that Ant Financial is a technology company. However, if they are offering loans, especially large loans to businesses and individuals, and the amount of risk that they pose to the system grows and grows, then perhaps they need to be regulated like a bank, whether it keeps to certain reserve ratios and other limitations that banks have to keep to manage risk. And that, of course, is a big part of why the Ant IPO was initially scuppered. So right now, we've seen 2021 as being a really big year where the regulators, where the state has sort of come down in hard force on all the tech companies. You've seen a lot of op-eds talk about essentially, crazy, wild growth, a decade of wild growth. These companies have grown and grown, but now it's time for them to mature. Now it's time for regulations to come into place. And so we definitely have sort of an inflection point. I think we've probably seen the biggest examples already, and financial being the IPO being stopped. I don't know if we'll see sort of another big example of the next few years. However, we're definitely going to see, I think, a very slow process of the next few years as the two new laws, which is the data security law and the personal information protection law. So they're new laws. And so under these laws, we'll have administrative regulations that will come in the coming years that will provide more clarity, for instance, on, how do we measure a monopoly? At what point, what percentage of data assets do you need to own in a particular industry to be considered a monopoly? And these kinds of questions, I think, are increasingly going to be answered. Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much, Dev. Very, very interesting. And this million question, it's a very nice question, because we have to know how these regulators are going to regulate actually in the future, and how they are going to manage to deal with different topics and different areas. And now I would like to go back to Camila. We have a question from our audience, Rafael Zanata from Brazil, and from Data Privacy Brazil, and he asked, what about the regulatory power of financial authorities? Is the Brazilian Central Bank better suited to impose duties of care and privacy obligations for companies that operate with payment system, or is the data protection authorities in the Brazilian example that are very new and like understaffed and more precarious in institutional terms, or they are more able to tackle with the issues you are pointing in this case? So the question is the financial authority or the data protection authority to have to deal with this case? And I would add also, and how can we have, or how can we think about an interinstitutional approach? Is this a nice approach, and how can it be?
Thank you, Michel. Thank you, Rafael. I would start by answering your last part, Michel. I think that the answer is interinstitutional cooperation. In the case of Brazil, the financial and data protection, the competition authorities have some agreement on helping each other on these issues. But to start with the short answer, I don't think that one authority could impose all the obligations. The big tax on the concern of big tax in financial markets are more wide than only financial terms. We should also consider privacy terms, we should also consider consumer terms, and we should also consider competition terms. That is why I would praise what happened on the WhatsApp case on the interinstitutional recommendation, but I would also raise some concerns about it. It was an evolution for these four authorities to have a joint recommendation and to join efforts on it, but the final answer was not yet sufficient. They had one recommendation that was not mandatory at first in Brazil for WhatsApp to adapt some provisions on the privacy policy, but at the end, the Data Protection Authority made a statement, and two of the authorities just followed what the data protection analyzed. So, for example, CADE, the Competition Authority, and Senacon, the Consumer Authority, just were differentials to what the Data Protection Authority said. So when we are talking about these complex issues, and when we are talking about some interinstitutional approach, we should not be different. We should be cooperative. We should each authority should use and might use its competence to analyze the problems on the big scenario. And to answer directly what Rafael asked, I don't think that by themselves the Data Protection Authority and the central bank could give the answer. They need to have a complementary answer and a complementary regulation on this, and a specific regulation on this, because we have open banking regulation. We have, for example, PISP regulation for WhatsApp Pay, for example, but we do not have a bigger scenario on big tax on financial services. So we should have a more specific regulations on that. I hope to have answered the question.
Yes, perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Camila. And I'd like to go back to Vanessa and ask about this, about the future. How do you see this open banking, and what is PIX, if you can explain us, and how this is going to be with these new arrangements, new institutional approach to these questions, and what can expect from the future?
Okay, I just want to reinforce, I think, what Camila said and about the Rafael Zanata's question, and just like it. So I think we pointed this, but any traditional sector of the law will solve all the issues of big tax in financial. So it's new, and we needed a dynamic vision, a dynamic perspective, and dynamic regulation for this, and also a cooperation of the authorities, and understanding that there is no country that is going to solve an issue. And it's a power issue. It's a power issue all around the globe. And we are unfortunately in the weak side of the thing. So I just wanted to point at this, but about open banking and PIX. PIX, it's a new instant payment system led by the Central Bank of Brazil. And it has a different network. It's all provided by the Central Bank of Brazil. It's integrated with the bank accounts, and there is no fee to transfer money between people. You can do the 24/7, and and it has more trust from the population. It's very popular in Brazil, actually, and it was launched in November 2020, and WhatsApp payment actually, it's not integrated to Pix yet, and it was launched just authorized actually just in April 2021. But Pix is very popular, and it's also like a verb in Brazil, just to understand, like we need to do, like M-Pesa is very popular in Kenya. Pix is very popular in Brazil. Actually, the provider, the payment initiator service provider can integrate the open banking Brazil. But it is in certain contexts, actually. I think I've mentioned the regulations. They are like the Central Bank of Brazil. They are just testing some regulations. I think the plan of implementation of open banking Brazil, I think Camila can complement me. It's also delayed, but there is a possibility of integration. And just to make a note, the Open Bank initiative in Brazil, it's actually led by the Central Bank of Brazil. I know it in different cases, in different countries, I think as India, it's not integrated situation, but in Brazil it is. I don't know, maybe I was clear, maybe not. But yes.
Thank you, Vanessa. And I would like to go to the final remarks. We are running out of time. It's been a very nice chat with you all, and I would like to ask Dev, what are your final remarks, and how do you see this comparative approach between Brazil and China, and how can we learn from one side and from the other side, from the regulative side, about data protection, about financial regulation?
Yeah, no, it was really great and insightful listening to both Vanessa and Camila on what's developing on these fronts. I think it's very clear that finance is such a core part of everyone's lives, and the platformization of finance has brought this issue now to the forefront, I think, throughout the global south, especially, where I think many of our countries here have leapfrogged beyond the old system and jumped straight into mobile. And so I think it's bringing in both the innovation and the risks. I think looking in Asia and in the Chinese example, for instance, I think it's very clear that these regulations and laws targeted to data are just going to grow and grow. And not just data in general, but bringing very specific provisions and categories for types of data, types of context, and where we really have to get very granular around what kind of data is being used, in what context, and what kind of regulations come in place. I think looking at the Chinese example of trying to, let's just say, break these data islands and connect the data from the private sector to some sort of national platform is interesting. I think looking at how we can provision this data to be harnessed for not just the interest of one company, but for a wider societal benefit, I think are very interesting. And I know we haven't talked about India specifically, but I think in India as well, with the UPI payment index and payment network and sort of experiments around there, I think there's definitely a thinking of bringing this data and making it sort of more harness that for wider societal benefit. However, I think the dangers are clear, which is, where's the individual in all of this, right? Where are the rights of the individual? Who's fighting for those rights? Is it the state or the company? Where's the sort of agency for the users, to both in terms of what data they want to share, how much data that they own, and where is that the end user and the sort of citizen in this dynamic? And I think in Asia, there's very few examples we're seeing of very citizen-centric regulations come in place. Right now, it's really about pulling the power away from the platform companies, but it's shifting between the platform company and the nation state. And so really the question is, and I think learning from Brazil's example really seems to be really important here as well, of another important large global South country. So yeah, very, very interesting, I think, space. And it's, I think, certainly something that we need to keep coming back to get updates on every 6 to 9 months as the space is changing and developing so fast. So thank you to my co-panelists, thank you to the organizers, Michel and Amanda, and yeah, forward to continuing this discussion.
Thank you very much for participation and for sharing with us all this interesting information about what's happening in China and how can we see the differences, but also the commonalities between the two countries. And I would like to go to Camila and ask a question about what's happening with zero rating. For example, in Colombia right now, we are discussing in the Constitutional Court if the zero rating is like constitutional and how this deals with an open internet, and how does zero rating has to deal with this case, and what are the perceptions also about the competition authority from Brazil. And if you could also give your final remarks, since we are running out of time. Thank you very much, Camila.
Sure, thank you for the question, Michel. I will try not to be very long, but this is an important question because zero rating impacts a lot of Brazil and also other countries. It's good to know that it's being questioned in Colombia. So zero rating is this practice of not using mobile data for certain apps. This could happen during when the franchise is still running and after the franchise. So our concern is that for one side, it is good for consumers at first sight that some apps do not use data, especially because Vanessa mentioned data in Brazil, franchise in Brazil, we have low data franchise in Brazil. But this has some consequences, such as consumer bias. So consumers do not think about using other apps since one app or some apps are being favored by these practices. So the consequences are what we mentioned. The data, for example, in Brazil is that consumers use WhatsApp in 90% of the cases. Other apps do not are strong in Brazil, and this is not bad per se, but it is bad when we see that consumers are locked in one ecosystems, and this strengthens Meta's and Facebook, WhatsApp power, and these are the apps that are being favored right now with these practices: Instagram, WhatsApp, and Facebook in general. Some apps are as TikTok and Netflix in some cases are being favored, but in general are the Meta apps. And the results of how the consumer use these apps are, we have some concerns on that. So when we are using messaging apps and also financial services on these apps, consumers do not see an alternative, do not see competition, and this is a concern. So to bring final remarks, I would like to answer Rafael. Rafael made a comment on the chat about how we have to address the regulation and these problems on also a global South perspective, on a tailor-made perspective. And I think this is perfect because when we are talking about big techs, we are talking about power, but we are also talking about the reality and the specificity of each country. So I agree, I totally agree with you, Rafa. We have to understand the specificities of each country. But in my speech, I tried to bring this Brazilian perspective. I tried to bring the WhatsApp case, and not to give answers, but to raise some questions on how can we solve this dynamic situation. This is new. We don't have an answer, but we don't have to be different on what the market is developing. We have to raise some concerns, some privacy concerns, some competition concerns, and to see how the consumers are affected. And it was a pleasure for me to contribute in this debate, and it was really good to hear about Vanessa's research, about coding rights research. I would love to read it, and thank you also, Dev and Michel, for sharing this panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Camila. Vanessa, would like to give your final remarks?
Oh, I think I talked too much, but I'd like to thank you so much for Camila, for Dev, for Amanda, for Michel. It's very nice, and I think the debates will going on. Like the debate goes through the issues of data colonialism, data protection, consumer law, competition law, and it shows actually the complexity and of the topic and actually that data protection is not enough to debate like big text in the financial. So are you invited to read and give me comments and etc. And I think we keep in touch. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. And I would like to express my gratitude for you all for participating in this panel. It's a very important topic and a very complex topic, because we are talking about different regulations and we are talking about different perspectives from each country, and it's been very rich to hear you all, to hear the research that Vanessa talked to us, to hear the Idec's perspective that Camila brings us from a consumer perspective, and also for the case, the WhatsApp case that Idec is pushing, the Data Protection Authority, and we know that this is like is going to have a central role in this question, because we're talking about data sharing, and it was very, very nice to hear Dev and the considerations from China and what's going on and what we can expect. And it was a really pleasure. And also I'd like to express that we have like a really international panel, because I'm now in Kigali, Camila in São Paulo, Vanessa in Silicon Valley, Dev in Thailand. So we are completely different time zones, and it was very nice and very special. Thank you all for this, and I would like to express my gratitude in the name of Derechos Digitales also. And that's it. You have the link of the coding rights research, and we stay in touch. Thank you. Bye-bye.